In a world where hierarchy is written in blood and bows, our currency more valuable than gold, there exists a special kind of exile reserved for those who refuse to kneel. Talia had mastered this art of dignified resistance, carving out an existence at the very edges of pack territory where the trees grew wild and the rules grew thin. Her small house stood like a declaration of independence, weathered but unbroken, humble but wholly her own, a sanctuary built from salvaged dreams and stubborn determination. She was 26, and gloriously untethered. An Omega who had committed the cardinal sin of believing her worth wasn't determined by an Alpha's approval. The pack whispered about her choice to live alone, their voices carrying the particular cruelty reserved for women who dared imagine they could exist without masculine protection. They called her foolish, broken, tragically naive about the realities of a world designed to devour the unguarded. But in the quiet hours before dawn, when mist rose from the forest floor like ancient prayers, and the only sounds were her own breathing and the honest creak of floorboards beneath her feet, Talia knew they were wrong. Freedom tasted like morning coffee brewed exactly to her preference, like books read without permission, like the profound peace of answering to no one but herself. Yet even the most carefully constructed independence can be shattered by desperate men bearing crowns too heavy for their heads. When the Alpha King's heir arrived at her door, imperious, entitled, demanding salvation from political chains forged by others, Talia faced a choice that would test every principle she had died to defend. Help him and risk the autonomy she had sacrificed everything to build. Refuse him and watch as forces beyond her control swept them both toward futures neither wanted. But perhaps, in a world obsessed with dominance and submission, the most radical act of rebellion was teaching a prince that true power lay not in commanding others, but in earning the right to stand beside someone who chose to stay. The transformation was about to begin, built not on royal decree, but on the dangerous premise that sometimes the strongest bonds are forged by those brave enough to meet as equals. All it required was one impossible demand, and the courage to answer with terms that would reshape a kingdom. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. Talia was patching her roof when the future Alpha King arrived to destroy her peaceful evening. She heard his expensive boots on her makeshift porch before she saw him, the kind of arrogant stride that belonged to someone who'd never been kept waiting. His knock was imperious, demanding exactly what she'd expected from entitled royalty. "Go away," she called without looking down. "Whatever you're selling or demanding, I'm not interested. Open this door. Now." The voice carried genetic dominance that made most wolves submit automatically. Rich, commanding, saturated with authority. "I'm not here for your convenience." Talia paused, hammer raised, studying the figure below. Perfect posture from deportment lessons, dark hair catching moonlight like silk, expensive travel clothes despite their simplicity. Everything screamed wealth, power, and absolute certainty that the world existed to serve his preferences. Exactly the type of alpha that had driven her beyond pack borders. "I'm not here to jump when strangers make demands," she replied cheerfully, returning to her work. "Funny how that goes. Do you know who I am? Someone about to leave if he doesn't learn manners." She positioned another shingle deliberately. "Don't care if you're the Alpha King himself. This is my house, my land, my rules. I am the Alpha King's heir." The declaration hung like a thrown gauntlet. Talia felt her Omega instincts flutter with nervous submission, but years of building immunity to Alpha posturing kept her independence intact. "Congratulations. I'm sure Mama's proud. What do you want?" Prince Kieran, for it could only be him, raked his hair with obvious frustration. She could see tension in his shoulders, hands clenching as he fought between politeness and commanding compliance. "I need a mate," he said reluctantly. "By tomorrow morning, before sunrise." Talia nearly fell off the roof laughing. "Oh, that's rich. Let me guess. Political marriage breathing down your neck? Need quick solution to avoid getting trapped with daddy's choice?" His tightening jaw confirmed her accuracy. "It's not simple," he said through gritted teeth. "Never is with you people." She climbed down with practiced ease. "What makes you think I'd play pretend mate with someone who shows up like I'm emergency services?" Face to face, she saw desperation beneath his commanding exterior. His amber eyes held frustration and genuine fear. Whatever drove him wasn't just political convenience. It was survival. "Because you live outside pack structure," he said, voice dropping to normal conversation. No family or connections to complicate arrangements. And because you're Omega. Ah, there it is. Her voice turned winter cold. The real reason. Need someone whose biology makes the bond believable, but disposable enough you won't feel guilty discarding her later. It's not— Stop right there, Your Highness. She stepped closer, deliberately invading personal space with casual hierarchy disregard that shocked him. I'm not some desperate Omega waiting for alpha validation. I have a perfectly good life without anyone's permission, and I sure don't need entitled princes messing it up. Deafening silence followed, broken only by wind through trees and distant night birds conducting ordinary business. Prince Kieran stared with expression suggesting no one had ever spoken to him so bluntly. Everyone has a price, he said finally. Name yours. My price? Talia laughed humorlessly. Fine. One condition. She gestured toward her ramshackle house, better decades behind it. Mismatched shutters, front porch held by rope and stubbornness, flower boxes blooming with plants most considered weeds. If you want me as mate, even temporarily, you come here. Live by my rules, eat my food, sleep where I tell you, work to earn your keep. No servants, no guards, no royal protocol. Want my help? Learn what life looks like when you can't command through problems. Prince Kieran's eyes widened as implications sank in. You're saying I'd have to live like a real person for once in your privileged life. She crossed arms, studying his face analytically. But your precious dignity's worth more than avoiding whatever marriage trap you've created. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly. I'm asking you to be human instead of royal. Exist without crowns propping up your ego. Her smile was sharp as broken glass. Question is whether you're brave enough discovering who you are underneath inherited authority. His expression transformed subtly, surprise becoming respect, followed by calculating assessment. She'd presented a puzzle he hadn't expected. If I agree, accept your conditions, what then? Then we do whatever ceremony makes this legal. You get your mating bond to wave at whoever's forcing unwanted matrimony. Talia shrugged casually. Assuming this is about appearances and political maneuvering, not relationship expectations. It is, he confirmed, though admission seemed costly. Good, because I'm not interested playing devoted mate to someone whose partnership idea involves giving orders and expecting gratitude. She turned toward her door. So what's it going to be? Ready slumming with common folk, or taking chances with whatever bride father picked? Prince Kieran followed up creaking steps, movement suggesting he was processing their conversation's surreal nature. At the door he paused, looking back at forests stretching into darkness, the path returning to politics and protocol and inherited expectations. If I do this, there's no going back. Once mating bonds established, even temporarily, it changes everything. Everything was already changing. Question is whether change happens on your terms or someone else's. She opened her door, revealing interior clean and comfortable despite obvious poverty. Handmade furniture around stone fireplace, books stacked everywhere, lived-in warmth from genuinely loved, rather than simply maintained space. Welcome to my palace, she said with mock grandeur. Hope you're not allergic to honest work, because if you're staying, you're contributing. Prince Kieran stepped across her threshold, expensive boots suddenly loud on rough wooden floors. In lamplight, she watched him absorb details. Mended furniture, carefully tended plants, books ranging from practical guides to dense philosophy texts. It's not what I expected. What did you expect? Hovel? Desperate Omega in squalor? Grateful for any alpha attention? Something like that, he admitted with genuine embarrassment. Well, surprise. Some of us handle ourselves fine without alpha supervision. Talia moved through her home confidently, lighting additional lamps, stirring banked fireplace coals to warming life. Though I suppose that concept's foreign to someone who's never worried about his next meal. You're angry. I'm realistic. There's a difference. She settled into her favorite chair, battered recliner rescued and restored with patience and determination, studying him with frank curiosity. So tell me, Prince Kieran, what exactly are you running from that makes this arrangement seem reasonable? His laugh was bitter as winter wind. Marriage to Lady Cassandra Blackwood, designed to unite two most powerful pack territories on the continent. Union strengthening bloodlines, creating political alliances lasting generations. Sounds perfectly reasonable from dynastic perspective. What's the problem? Problem is, Lady Cassandra embodies everything I despise about modern pack politics. Shallow, manipulative, cruel to anyone she considers beneath her station. She sees marriage as opportunity gaining royal power access for personal purposes, not partnership or genuine connection. And you don't get choice. Exactly. He looked at her with something approaching gratitude for understanding his dilemma's core. Unless I present father with established mating bond by sunrise, betrothal contracts get signed and I'm legally bound marrying someone who'll make both our lives miserable for political convenience. Talia nodded slowly, processing information and implications. So this arrangement, what exactly are you thinking? Temporary mating dissolved once immediate crisis passes? If you're willing. His amber eyes searched her face for agreement or rejection signs. Bond would be real enough satisfying legal requirements and pack law, but without emotional attachment making separation complicated. What's in it for me beyond frustrating your father's political plan satisfaction? Prince Kieran was quiet for long moments, clearly considering his answer carefully. When he spoke, his voice carried sincerity that seemed to surprise them both. Protection. Legal connection to royal bloodline making you untouchable to anyone trying forcing you back into pack structure against your will. Official recognition as someone who matters, even choosing to continue living independently. The offer was more tempting than Talia wanted admitting. She'd spent years carefully maintaining autonomy, but there had been close calls. Pack officials questioning her right living outside their authority. Alphas thinking her independence invited domination attempts. Bureaucrats making life difficult simply because she didn't fit neat classification categories. Royal protection would eliminate those problems permanently. There's something else, Prince Kieran continued, voice dropping toward confession. I need understanding what I'm fighting to preserve. If I'm challenging the system that created this mess, I need knowing what alternatives actually look like. You think my hermit existence is alternative to royal politics? I think your independence is exactly what I've been missing my entire life. His admission came out rough with emotion he was clearly trying suppressing. I think maybe learning to live without servants and protocol and inherited authority might teach me something important about who I could be making different choices. Honesty in his voice caught Talia off guard, revealing depths she hadn't expected beneath privileged exterior. For the first time since arriving, she saw not entitled alpha heir, but someone genuinely trapped by circumstances beyond control, searching for alternatives not requiring sacrificing everything he might want becoming. All right, but we do this my way, start to finish. You don't get changing rules when living like commoner becomes inconvenient. Agreed. And when this is over, when your political crisis is resolved and you don't need convenient Omega anymore, you walk away cleanly. No trying maintaining connection. No guilt trips about abandoning me. We return to separate lives like this never happened. Something flickered in his expression at her words, but he nodded agreement. If that's what you want. That's what I want, Talia confirmed, though she wasn't entirely sure why the words felt like lies on her tongue. So how exactly does this mating ceremony work? Please tell me it doesn't involve lots of pageantry and witnesses. Legal requirements are actually quite simple. Exchange of vows, physical marking establishing scent connection, registration with pack authorities. Prince Kieran's professional tone suggested he'd researched the process thoroughly. We can handle ceremony here, tonight, file documentation tomorrow morning. Physical marking, bite establishing scent bonding. Nothing intimate beyond that. His cheeks colored slightly, suggesting royal education hadn't entirely prepared him discussing practical mating aspects with someone he'd known less than an hour. Right. Let's get this over with then. Talia rose with brisk efficiency, moving toward her kitchen. I've got ceremonial candles somewhere, and wine I've been saving for special occasions. Might as well use it for something memorable. As she busied herself with preparations, she caught Prince Kieran watching with expression she couldn't quite read, something almost wistful in his gaze, as if already mourning loss of something he'd never actually possessed. Having second thoughts? She asked, noticing hesitation. No, just grateful. I know this arrangement benefits me more than you, and I want you knowing I don't take that for granted. Good, because after tonight, you're learning exactly what gratitude looks like when backed by actual work. She moved through her humble home with confident purpose, gathering simple materials needed for ceremony that would bind them together in ways neither fully understood. Outside, night wind carried scents of pine and distant rain, and somewhere in darkness, forces that would try tearing them apart were already marshalling for battles yet to come. But for now, in warm lamplight circles, two people who'd never expected needing each other prepared forging connection that would change both their lives in ways they couldn't possibly anticipate. "Are you ready?" Prince Kieran asked as she finished lighting candles that would witness their vows. "I've been ready since you showed up with your ridiculous demand," Talia replied, with smile equal parts challenge and invitation. "Question is whether you're ready discovering what you've gotten yourself into." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything recorded in royal protocol, conducted in run-down house at nowhere's edge by two people who barely knew each other, but were about becoming bound in ways transcending politics or convenience. And as Prince Kieran spoke ancient words that would make them mates under pack law, as Talia felt his teeth graze her throat in marking that would tie their scents together for life, she realized her peaceful isolation was about becoming far more complicated than ever bargained for. But perhaps, she thought, as his warmth settled around her like promise she hadn't dared making herself, complicated wasn't necessarily unwelcome. The first indication that mating the Alpha King's heir would complicate her life beyond recognition came at dawn, when Talia woke to helicopters circling her house like mechanical vultures. She bolted upright, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar warmth beside her. The previous evening crashed back. Impromptu ceremony, surprisingly gentle marking bite, the way Kieran had curled on her living room floor despite her couch offer, claiming alphas were designed sleeping between their mates and potential threats. Now he stood at her bedroom window, still wearing yesterday's expensive clothes, but looking somehow different in morning light. Less polished, more human. His presence in her private space should have felt intrusive, but instead seemed almost natural. "They found us," he said without turning around, voice carrying resigned acceptance. Faster than expected. Talia joined him at the window, taking in multiple aircraft maintaining formation over her property. Even from distance, she could make out royal insignia and serious armament suggesting this wasn't friendly social calling. "Your father?" Among others, probably half the royal council, Lady Blackwood's family representatives, whatever emergency response team handles political crises involving heir apparent. He finally looked at her, apology written in every expression line. "I'm sorry. I knew this would draw attention, but hoped we'd have more time establishing the bond before they tracked us. How did they find us so quickly?" "Royal security places tracking enchantments on immediate family members. I disabled mine yesterday afternoon, but apparently not thoroughly enough." His jaw tightened with frustration. "Or someone provided our location through other means." Outside, helicopters were landing in the small clearing behind her house, rotor wash sending her carefully tended garden into chaotic upheaval. Talia watched years of work being destroyed by casual indifference of those who'd never grown their own food, felt her temper spike accordingly. "They're landing in my vegetables," she said with dangerous calm. "Talia, they're landing in my vegetables." Each word came precisely enunciated, carrying fury that smart people learned recognizing and avoiding. "I spent 3 years building that garden. 3 years improving soil, selecting plants thriving in this climate, creating something beautiful and functional with my own hands." Kieran watched her face with growing alarm. "I'll have them compensate you for damage. Triple value for everything destroyed." "Compensate?" Talia turned to him with smile that preceded truly spectacular temper displays. "You think this is about money? Then what? Get out," she said quietly. "Excuse me? Get out of my house. Right now. Before I do something violating our agreement terms." Kieran's expression shifted from confusion to understanding, as he registered her anger's depth. "Talia, I know this isn't what we planned, but our agreement was that if you wanted my cooperation, you'd live by my rules and respect my space." She gestured toward windows where uniformed figures deployed from aircraft with military precision. "Does this look like respecting my space? I didn't tell them to come, but you knew they would. You knew mating the Alpha King's heir would turn my quiet life into circus, and you did it anyway because your problems were more important than my peace." She moved toward her bedroom door with jerky, angry movements. "Well, congratulations, Your Highness. You've successfully avoided unwanted marriage by destroying everything I worked building here." "Wait." The command in his voice was automatic, backed by generations of royal authority expecting instant obedience. Talia stopped walking, but when she turned back, her eyes blazed with defiance that no genetic programming could overcome. "Don't," she said with deadly softness. Don't you dare use that tone with me in my own house. We might be mated under pack law, but that doesn't make you my alpha, and it sure doesn't give you rights ordering me around. Silence was broken by boots on her front porch. Heavy, purposeful footsteps of people accustomed having doors opened, whether or not they were welcome. "Prince Kieran!" The voice calling through her walls carried authority, expecting immediate response. "By order of the Alpha King, you will present yourself immediately for escort back to the capital." "And there we have it," Talia said with bitter satisfaction. "Your real life has arrived collecting you. Hope you enjoyed your brief vacation among common folk." Before Kieran could respond, her front door exploded inward with crash, sending wood splinters flying across her carefully maintained living room. Armed figures in royal livery poured through the opening, weapons raised, expressions grim with professional competence, leaving no doubt about their willingness using force. "Nobody move." The command came from a woman whose silver hair and military bearing marked her as someone high-ranking in royal security apparatus. "Prince Kieran, step away from the Omega and identify yourself." "I'm exactly where I choose being, Commander Walsh," Kieran replied calmly, moving to position himself between Talia and armed soldiers. "And I'm already identified since you obviously knew where finding me. Sir, with respect, you've been declared missing under potentially coercive circumstances. We're here ensuring your safety and returning you to protective custody." "Coercive circumstances?" Talia laughed, sound sharp enough cutting glass. "You think I kidnapped a prince? With what army?" Commander Walsh's attention shifted to her with cold assessment, measuring threat levels and vulnerability in single glance. "You're the Omega who performed unauthorized mating ceremony with throne heir. That makes you either very brave or very stupid." "I'm the Omega who agreed helping someone out of difficult situation," Talia corrected firmly. "And I'm the person whose house you just broke into without invitation or legal warrant. Royal security doesn't require warrants when investigating crown threats. Good thing I'm not threatening the crown, then. I'm just demanding people show basic respect for my property and rights." The standoff that followed was tense with violence possibilities, broken only when new voice cut through confrontation with absolute authority, making even armed soldiers step aside. "That's enough." The Alpha King entered through her doorway destruction with bearing of someone accustomed having reality reorganize around his preferences. He was tall, imposing, radiating power that made Talia's Omega instincts scream warnings about dominant predators and challenging their authority prices. Behind him walked woman, whose elegant beauty was spoiled by cruelty that turned her smile into weapon. Lady Cassandra Blackwood, undoubtedly, arriving to reclaim her wayward fiancé. "Father," Kieran said formally, offering bow that managed conveying respect without subservience. "I wasn't expecting you handling this personally. I wasn't expecting my heir running off and mating some random Omega to avoid his responsibilities," the Alpha King replied with controlled fury that could level cities when finally unleashed. "Yet here we are. Here we are indeed." Kieran's voice carried its own steel, suggesting royal authority ran both ways in this family. Though I'd hardly characterize fulfilling pack law regarding free choice in mating as running away from responsibility. "Free choice?" Lady Cassandra stepped forward with humorless laugh. "Don't be ridiculous, Kieran. You clearly coerced this poor creature into sham ceremony, avoiding honoring your existing commitments." Talia felt her temper, already strained past breaking by her home and garden destruction, finally snap completely. "Poor creature?" she repeated with dangerous calm. "Coerced. Lady, you don't know me well enough making assumptions about my decision-making capabilities." "I know enough," Cassandra replied dismissively. "I know you're Omega, living alone beyond pack protection, probably desperate enough accepting any offer seeming to improve your circumstances. I know you're hardly the type of woman who could attract genuine royal interest without employing manipulation or worse." The insult hung in air like thrown challenge. Around the room, armed soldiers tensed for potential violence, while their commanders watched carefully for signs the situation was about escalating beyond political theater into genuine bloodshed. It was Kieran who moved first, stepping forward with movements carrying fluid grace of someone born commanding and barely controlled rage of someone whose mate had just been insulted in her own home. "Lady Blackwood," he said with icy politeness, "you will apologize to my wife immediately, or you will remove yourself from her property before I remove you personally." The words "my wife" fell into charged silence like stones into still water. creating shock and recognition ripples spreading through assembled crowd. It was one thing learning about hasty mating ceremony through intelligence reports. Another entirely hearing heir apparent claim his Omega publicly, and with obvious sincerity. Wife? The Alpha King's voice carried dangerous undertones, suggesting conversation was about becoming significantly more serious. Kieran, what exactly have you done? What I should have done years ago, Kieran replied firmly. I chose mate who sees me as person rather than political asset. I chose someone who values honesty and independence over wealth and status. I chose someone who challenges me being better than I was raised being. He turned, looking at Talia with expression holding emotion depths she wasn't prepared examining too closely. And I chose someone who was brave enough helping stranger in trouble, even when helping him would complicate her own life beyond recognition. How touching, Cassandra said with acid sweetness. And when this little rebellion of yours is over, when reality sets in and you remember your duties to your bloodline, what happens to your brave little Omega then? That, Kieran said firmly, will be between me and my mate, not between me and someone whose opinion I've never valued. The confrontation was interrupted by yet another voice arrival, this one belonging to someone Talia recognized with sinking heart as regional pack coordinator, bureaucrat whose job involved ensuring Omega rights were respected within established pack law. Forgive interruption, Your Majesty, the coordinator said with nervous deference, but there appears some confusion about this mating's legal status. What kind of confusion? The Alpha King demanded. Well, sir, according to documentation filed this morning, ceremony was conducted according to all established protocols. Voluntary participation by both parties, proper witnesses. What witnesses? Cassandra interrupted sharply. There was no one else present. Actually, ma'am, pack law recognizes spiritual witnessing as well as physical. Ceremony was conducted in presence of household spirits and ancestral energies, which constitutes legal witnessing under traditional protocols. The coordinator's explanation sent surprise murmurs through assembled soldiers and officials. Most modern matings were conducted in formal settings with extensive guest lists and official oversight. The idea that two people could bind themselves together with nothing but candles and sincere intention wasn't technically illegal, but certainly irregular. Furthermore, coordinator continued with growing confidence, both parties are legal age, neither is bound by previous mating contracts, and the Omega in question appears having entered arrangement willingly and with full understanding of implications. Appears to have? The Alpha King asked with raised eyebrows. Well, sir, that would need confirmation through direct questioning. But initial evidence suggests this is legitimate mating rather than coercive arrangement. All eyes turned to Talia, who found herself attention center in ways she'd spent years carefully avoiding. Smart thing would be acknowledging mating had been temporary arrangement, designed solving Kieran's immediate problem without creating long-term complications. Sensible thing would be minimizing damage to her quiet life and extracting herself from royal politics as quickly as possible. Instead, she looked around at her home's destruction, her garden's ruin, casual dismissal of her autonomy and intelligence, felt her stubborn independence assert itself with crystalline clarity. Let me make something perfectly clear, she said, voice carrying across room with surprising authority. I entered this mating willingly, with full understanding of what I was agreeing doing. Prince Kieran didn't coerce me, manipulate me, or take advantage of any desperation on my part. She paused, meeting Alpha King's eyes directly, ignoring way her Omega instinct screamed warnings about challenging such concentrated authority. I chose helping him because he asked respectfully, offered fair terms, and treated me like person capable making my own decisions. Her gaze shifted to Lady Cassandra with obvious disdain, which is apparently more consideration than some people are capable showing. And now? The Alpha King asked quietly. Now that you've seen what being connected to royal family actually means? Are you still honoring this arrangement? Talia looked around at chaos that royal attention had brought to her carefully ordered life. Her door hung off hinges. Her furniture was scattered and damaged. Her garden, 3 years of patient work, was destroyed beyond any quick repair hope. Then she looked at Kieran, who watched her with expression mixing hope and resignation in equal measure. He was expecting her to walk away, she realized. Expecting her deciding association cost with him was higher than she was willing paying. That depends, she said finally. On what? On whether your son is prepared honoring our agreement. She fixed Kieran with level stare, carrying weight of everything they'd discussed the previous night. We had deal. He lives by my rules, contributes to household, learns what life looks like without crown cushioning every step. And in exchange? In exchange, I provide whatever cooperation is necessary, helping him avoid unwanted marriage. She shrugged, as if discussing something no more significant than weather. Seems to me like that arrangement is still mutually beneficial. You can't be serious, Cassandra said with disbelief. You're actually suggesting throne heir should live like commoner? I'm suggesting if he wants my continued cooperation, he honors terms we agreed to. Talia's smile was sharp as broken glass. Of course, if those terms are unacceptable, he's free exploring other options. Silence that followed was deafening, broken only by wind through her broken door and distant bird calls conducting ordinary business. Around room, soldiers and officials exchanged glances, suggesting they'd never witnessed anything quite like this confrontation. It was Kieran who broke standoff, stepping forward with movements carrying decision and resolve in equal measure. Father, he said formally, I request permission remaining here as agreed, to honor my mating bond terms, and learn what my mate considers important for my education. Kieran, Alpha King said with parental authority, transcending royal protocol. Think carefully about what you're asking. Once you make this choice, there will be consequences going far beyond your personal preferences. There are already consequences, Kieran replied steadily. Question is, whether those consequences result from choices I made for myself, or choices others made for me. Alpha King studied his son's face for long moments, apparently reading determination that couldn't be shaken by threats or bribes or royal disapproval. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight of decisions that would reshape kingdoms. Very well, but understand this. If you choose honoring this arrangement, you do so without royal protection or support. You live as she lives, by work of your own hands and strength of your own character. I understand. And when you fail, when common life reality proves too difficult for someone raised in luxury, you return home without complaint and honor commitments your bloodline requires. If I fail, Kieran agreed, but not before I've given this arrangement fair trial. Alpha King nodded once, then turned attention back to Talia, with eyes holding assessment depth she wasn't sure wanting to understand. And you, Omega, are you prepared for what you've taken on? Raising royal heir to understand common life is not responsibility that can be undertaken lightly. I'm prepared treating him like anyone else who wants living under my roof, Talia replied firmly. No special privileges, no allowances for inexperience, and absolutely no tolerance for complaints about how hard things are compared to palace life. Good. Something that might have been approval flickered in Alpha King's expression. Because if you succeed, teaching my son what he needs learning, you will have done something that 20 years of royal education failed accomplishing. He gestured to his entourage, who began filing toward door with military precision. But before leaving, he paused, delivering one final warning. Engagement to Lady Blackwood is postponed, not cancelled, he said quietly. This arrangement buys you time. Nothing more. Use it wisely. After they were gone, after helicopters had departed and Forrest had settled back into usual peace, Talia and Kieran stood together in her home's wreckage and surveyed damage that royal politics had brought to her carefully maintained sanctuary. Well, she said finally, I hope you're handy with tools, because we've got lots of work ahead. Kieran looked around destruction with something approaching dismay. I've never actually, that is, I don't have much experience with real work, Talia supplied helpfully. With fixing things that break? With building something from nothing but effort and determination? Something like that. Good thing you've got excellent teacher then. Her smile carried challenge and invitation equally. Ready for your first lesson in living like everyone else? As they began assessing damage and planning repairs, Talia reflected on morning revelations. She'd agreed to simple arrangement. Temporary mating in exchange for royal protection and political maneuvering, frustration, satisfaction. Instead, she'd found herself bound to someone whose presence was already changing her life in ways she couldn't have anticipated. And perhaps more surprisingly, she was discovering change wasn't necessarily unwelcome, even if it meant starting with destroyed house and garden that would take years restoring. Are you having second thoughts? Kieran asked, apparently reading something in her expression, suggesting doubt. I'm having realistic thoughts about how much work this will be, and whether you're actually tough enough handling it. I guess we'll find out together. Yes, Talia agreed, looking around at chaos that would become their shared project. I guess we will. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Talia discovered that teaching a royal heir to live like a commoner was significantly more complicated than she'd anticipated, and infinitely more rewarding than she'd dared hope. "You're holding the hammer wrong," she said for the 15th time that morning, watching Kieran struggle with what should have been a simple task of replacing damaged floorboards. "It's not a royal scepter. You don't need to grip it like you're afraid someone's going to snatch it away." Kieran paused in his work, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool autumn air flowing through their still damaged front door. His expensive clothes had been replaced by practical work gear she'd purchased in town, but he still moved with the careful precision of someone who'd never risked breaking a nail, let alone callousing his hands. Like this, he adjusted his grip according to her instructions, and this time when he swung, the nail went in straight instead of bending at an awkward angle. Better. Talia nodded approval from where she sat sorting through salvageable materials. "You're learning. Slowly, but you're learning." The past weeks had been a revelation for both of them. Kieran had approached every task with the same methodical intensity he probably brought to royal duties, systematic, thorough, and absolutely determined to master whatever challenge she presented. The problem was that real work didn't respond to royal authority or careful planning. It required intuition, adaptability, and the willingness to fail spectacularly before succeeding modestly. "Tell me again why we're not hiring professionals to handle the major repairs," he asked, pausing to examine a board that wasn't quite fitting properly. "I know you said something about doing it ourselves, but surely efficiency would dictate—" "Efficiency," Talia interrupted, "would dictate that you learn the difference between solving problems with money and solving them with skill. Anyone can hire someone else to fix their house. Not everyone can fix it themselves. And you think I need to be in the second category? I think you need to understand what it feels like when your effort is the only thing standing between you and sleeping under a leaky roof." She stood, brushing sawdust off her clothes, and moved to examine his work. "When you're king someday, you'll be making decisions that affect people whose entire lives depend on their own hands and backs. Maybe you should know what that feels like." Kieran was quiet for several minutes, working steadily at fitting the problematic board. When he finally got it seated properly, his smile of satisfaction was so genuine and unguarded that Talia felt something flutter in her chest she wasn't prepared to examine closely. "There's something addictive about this," he said, running his hands over the smooth surface of their completed work. "Seeing immediate results from effort. Knowing that what you've accomplished will be there tomorrow, useful and solid. Most people call that job satisfaction," Talia observed dryly. "I'm told it's quite common among those who work for living. Is that what this feels like for you? Satisfaction?" He looked around at their slowly improving home with something approaching wonder. Building something that's yours, maintaining it, making it better. Among other things. She settled back down with her sorting, but found herself watching him more than her materials. Over the weeks, she'd witnessed his gradual transformation from polished royal to someone approaching normal humanity. His hands were developing calluses, his movements becoming more natural, his conversation shifting from formal courtesy to actual communication. More unsettling, she was beginning to enjoy his company in ways that had nothing to do with their arranged agreement. "What are the other things?" he asked, apparently genuinely curious about her perspective. "Pride, I suppose. Independence. The knowledge that I can take care of myself, no matter what happens." She paused in her work, considering how to explain something that had always been instinctive to her. When you own your life completely, when your comfort and security depend on your own choices and efforts, there's a kind of freedom that people who've never had to worry about basic survival can't understand. And you think I need to understand it. I think you need to choose whether you want understanding it. Talia met his eyes directly, noting the way afternoon sunlight turned them almost golden. This arrangement was supposed to be temporary, remember? A few weeks of playing commoner before you go back to being royal heir, and I go back to my quiet life. Something shifted in his expression at her words, a tightening around his eyes that suggested the reminder wasn't entirely welcome. "Is that what you want?" he asked quietly. "To go back to quiet life when this is over?" The question hung between them like a challenge, carrying implications that made Talia's pulse quicken with possibilities she hadn't dared examining. The honest answer was that she wasn't sure anymore. The solitary existence that had once seemed perfect was beginning to feel empty in comparison to shared work, evening conversations, and the simple pleasure of having someone who appreciated her skills rather than dismissing them. But admitting that would mean acknowledging that their arrangement had become something neither of them had planned, something that might be worth preserving beyond political necessity. "I want," she said carefully, "to make sure we both understand what we're choosing, not just for the next few weeks, but for whatever comes after." Before Kieran could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Talia felt her stomach sink as she recognized the purposeful rhythm of official travel, not the casual pace of neighbors or merchants, but the determined advance of people conducting business. "Expecting visitors?" Kieran asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "No more than you are." Talia rose, brushing sawdust from her clothes and mentally preparing herself for whatever complication was about to arrive on her doorstep. The riders who emerged from the forest were dressed in the practical travel gear that marked them as royal messengers rather than military forces, but their presence still carried an undercurrent of authority that set Talia's nerves on edge. At their head rode a woman whose bearing marked her as someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Prince Kieran," the woman called out as she dismounted. "I bring word from the Alpha King." Kieran set down his hammer and moved to meet their visitors, his posture automatically shifting into something more formal despite his work clothes and calloused hands. "Lady Margaret, I wasn't expecting royal correspondence quite so soon. Circumstances have changed, Your Highness. The Alpha King requires your immediate return to the capital for consultation regarding the Blackwood situation." "What about the Blackwood situation?" Talia asked, stepping forward to join the conversation, despite the disapproving looks from the other messengers. Lady Margaret's attention shifted to her, with the kind of polite dismissal that suggested Omega concerns were not considered relevant to royal business. "Nothing that need concern you, miss. This is a matter of pack politics and diplomatic necessity. Since I'm the one who helped create this situation, I think it concerns me quite a bit," Talia replied firmly, ignoring the way Kieran tensed at her tone. "What's happened?" It was Kieran who answered, his voice carrying grim understanding. "Lady Cassandra has made some kind of move. Something that requires immediate royal response to prevent larger political complications." Lady Margaret nodded reluctantly. "Lady Blackwood has formally appealed to the Continental Pack Council, claiming that Prince Kieran's hasty mating represents a breach of existing betrothal agreements and demanding either dissolution of the current bond or substantial compensation for damages to her family's political standing. Can she do that?" Talia asked, though she suspected the answer would not be encouraging. "She can petition," Lady Margaret replied. "Whether the council will grant her appeal depends largely on how the royal family chooses to respond, which is why Prince Kieran's immediate presence is required for strategy consultations." "How immediate?" Kieran asked. "We're expected to depart within the hour, Your Highness." The Alpha King was quite specific about the urgency. Talia felt something cold settle in her stomach as the implications of the message became clear. Their weeks of building something together, of learning to work as partners, of discovering what they might become given time and space. All of it was about to be swept away by the same political forces that had brought them together in the first place. "Of course," she said quietly. "Royal duties call." Kieran turned to look at her, and she saw conflict written plainly across his features. "Talia, you should go," she interrupted, forcing her voice to remain steady. "This is exactly the kind of crisis you were trying to avoid by mating me in the first place. You can't ignore it. The arrangement was that we'd face these challenges together. The arrangement was that I'd provide temporary assistance to help you avoid unwanted marriage." She gestured toward their half-repaired house, the evidence of their shared work scattered around them. "I never agreed to become a political liability that complicates your ability to handle royal business." The silence that followed was broken only by the restless movement of horses and the quiet conversations of messengers preparing for rapid departure. Lady Margaret watched their exchange with the kind of professional interest that suggested royal romantic complications were a familiar aspect of her duties. "Your Highness," she said gently, "we really must depart soon if we're to reach the capital by evening." Kieran nodded acknowledgement, but didn't move, his attention still fixed on Talia's face as if trying to memorize something he was about to lose. "This isn't how I wanted this to happen," he said quietly. "How did you want it to happen?" "I wanted time to figure out what we were building here before outside pressures forced decisions. I wanted to finish the house, to show you that I could be more than just royal heir looking for convenient solution to political problems." His admission hit her harder than she'd expected, carrying sincerity that made her chest tighten with emotions she wasn't prepared to handle. "Kieran, I wanted," he continued, stepping closer despite their audience, to ask you to consider making this arrangement permanent, because you wanted to, not because political necessity required it. The words hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. Everything she'd told herself about temporary arrangements and clean separations was crumbling in the face of his obvious sincerity and her own growing recognition that she didn't want him to leave. "Your Highness," Lady Margaret said more firmly, "the Alpha King's summons was not a request." "I know." Kieran's eyes never left Talia's face. "Will you wait for me? Will you give me chance to handle this crisis and return to finish what we started?" Talia looked around at their partially completed work. Floorboards that still needed finishing, walls that required repair, a garden that would need complete reconstruction before spring planting, all of it representing weeks of shared effort and growing partnership that she wasn't ready to abandon. "I'll be here," she said simply. "This is my home. I'm not going anywhere." The relief that flooded his features was answer enough to questions she hadn't dared asking herself. Whatever was developing between them, it mattered to him in ways that transcended political convenience or temporary arrangements. "I'll come back," he promised. "Whatever the council demands, whatever compromises have to be made, I'll find a way to return. I'll be waiting." Kieran turned to Lady Margaret with expression that carried royal authority, despite his work clothes and calloused hands. "Give me 5 minutes to gather my things." As he disappeared into the house, Lady Margaret approached Talia with something approaching sympathy in her expression. "You've done something remarkable, you know. In 3 weeks, you've accomplished what years of royal education couldn't manage." "What's that?" "You've taught him to see value in things that can't be commanded or inherited." The older woman's smile held genuine warmth. "That's not a lesson many princes ever learn." "Will it be enough?" Talia asked. "When the political pressure starts mounting, when he's surrounded by people telling him that commoner mates are luxury he can't afford, will what he's learned here be enough to matter?" "That depends on how much he's willing to fight for it." Lady Margaret's gaze was steady and assessing. "And how much you're willing to fight for him." When Kieran emerged from the house, he carried a small traveling pack and wore the kind of determined expression that suggested he'd made decisions that wouldn't be easily unmade. He paused beside Talia, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek with gentleness that belied his obvious urgency. "Whatever happens in the capital, whatever they demand or threaten, remember that I chose this," he said quietly. "I chose you, not because I needed political solution, but because you showed me who I could be if I was brave enough to change." "Be careful," she replied, her hand covering his. "Don't let them convince you that what we've built here isn't real. It's the most real thing in my life." Their kiss was brief, but intense, carrying promises that neither was sure they'd be able to keep, but both were determined to try. When they separated, Kieran's eyes held depths of emotion that made her believe he truly would find a way to return. As the royal party departed, Talia stood in front of their half-repaired house and watched until the horses disappeared into forest shadows. Then she turned back to their unfinished work, picking up Kieran's abandoned hammer and considering the tasks that lay ahead. She had a house to finish, a garden to plan, and time to think carefully about what she wanted her future to look like. When Kieran returned, and she was choosing to believe he would return, she intended to be ready with answers to questions they'd both been too cautious to ask. The work of building something worth fighting for was just beginning. 3 days later, the knock on her door came at sunset, urgent and familiar. Talia opened it to find not royal messengers or political complications, but Kieran himself, looking exhausted but determined. "That was quick," she said, though her heart raced with relief she hadn't wanted to acknowledge. "Quicker than expected." He stepped inside, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home. The council meeting turned out to be less complicated than anyone anticipated. "What happened?" Kieran's smile was sharp with satisfaction. Lady Cassandra overplayed her hand. Her appeal to the Continental Pack Council included some rather specific accusations about coercion and manipulation that required investigation. When council representatives interviewed both of us separately, her story fell apart under scrutiny. And it became clear that she was more interested in creating political chaos than in any genuine grievance about broken betrothal agreements. He settled into the chair that had become his usual spot, looking around at the work she'd continued in his absence. The council dismissed her appeal and suggested that the Blackwood family might want to reconsider their approach to future political negotiations. Talia felt tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying finally release. So the crisis is over? The immediate crisis, but there will be others. His expression grew serious. There always are in royal life. The question is whether you're willing to face them as my partner rather than as temporary arrangement. She studied his face, noting the changes that 3 days in the capital had brought. He looked older, more serious, but also more certain of what he wanted. What exactly are you asking? I'm asking if you'll marry me, he said simply. Not for political convenience or temporary solutions, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you. Here? She asked, gesturing around at their simple home with its ongoing repairs and humble comforts. Wherever you want to be. I've discovered that home isn't a place. It's a person. And you're my person, Talia. She looked around at the evidence of their shared work. Floorboards they'd repaired together. Walls they'd patched. Space they'd transformed through effort and cooperation. Then she looked at Kieran, seeing not the royal heir who'd arrived desperate and demanding, but the man who'd learned to value partnership over privilege. Yes, she said simply. Though I should warn you that being married to me won't make your political life any simpler. Simple, Kieran replied, rising to gather her in his arms, is vastly overrated. Their kiss tasted like promises kept, and futures worth fighting for. Outside, night settled over forest and kingdom alike, but inside their carefully tended home, two people who'd found each other through necessity were choosing to stay together through love. And in the morning, there would be more work to do. Floors to finish, gardens to plant, and a life to build that belonged entirely to them. 6 months later, the wedding was held not in the royal cathedral, but in the garden Talia had rebuilt behind their completed house. Representatives from every major pack attended, not because protocol demanded it, but because the story of the Alpha King's heir who'd learned to value love over political advantage had captured imaginations throughout the realm. Queen Talia, for that was her official title now, though she still insisted most people simply call her by name, stood beside her husband as he addressed their assembled guests with words that would reshape expectations about royal leadership for generations to come. Today, King Kieran said, his voice carrying across the gathering with quiet authority, we celebrate not just a marriage, but a different way of understanding what it means to serve others. My queen has taught me that true leadership comes not from commanding obedience, but from earning respect through honest work and genuine care for those we're privileged to serve. In the audience, Talia could see faces that reflected the changes their partnership had brought to the kingdom. Omega representatives who no longer needed to fear being dismissed or ignored in political discussions. Common-born advisors whose practical experience was valued alongside noble birth and formal education. Young nobles who were learning that privilege carried obligations rather than simply benefits. The crown we wear, Kieran continued, belongs not to us, but to everyone whose lives are affected by our decisions. We are stewards, not rulers, partners in building something better, not authorities demanding submission. When the ceremony concluded, when the last guests had departed and they stood alone in their garden under starlight, Talia reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. Any regrets? Kieran asked, using the question that had become traditional between them. About which part? Agreeing to help desperate stranger? Demanding that royal heir learn honest work? Marrying someone whose idea of romance involves rebuilding houses together? All of it. Everything that brought us here. Talia looked around at their garden, their home, their life built through shared effort and mutual respect. Then she looked at Kieran, her partner, her king, her perfect complement in all the ways that truly mattered. Not one, she said finally. Though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if you'd been less arrogant when you showed up demanding temporary mate. Then someone else would have taught me better, Kieran said with absolute confidence. Because destiny doesn't depend on any single choice or moment. It depends on the willingness to change when change is necessary, even when change is difficult, especially then. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her with same protective instincts that had first drawn them together. After all, what could be more difficult than a poor Omega teaching royal heir that everything he'd been raised to believe about power was wrong? When you put it like that, Talia said with a laugh, I suppose we can handle anything. In the distance, lights from their kingdom's settlements glowed like stars scattered across the landscape, communities where Omega voices carried weight in council meetings, where common-born citizens knew their concerns would receive fair hearing, where the crown's authority was balanced by accountability to those it served. A temporary arrangement had purchased more than political solution. It had bought transformation that would echo through generations, proving that sometimes the most profound changes begin not with royal decree, but with ordinary people brave enough to demand better from those who claim to lead them. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.